Hey, it's Soul with another video. As puberty once again sets in, I would love to continue the conversation of choice in the world of Warcraft, specifically the hot topic of choosing your covenant. A number of players have voiced their concerns about the possibility, maybe the likelihood, of making the wrong choice, leading to toxicity when it comes to building groups. It's not hard to imagine that theory crafters are going to share their sims and calculations, observers are going to look at the covenants that top-end raiders, PvPers, and dungeon runners have chosen, and this will risk infecting pretty much every level of gameplay, i.e. the toxicity that I mentioned. Prominent voices in the community have turned the conversation to the most immediate and jarring solution, which is to scrap the idea of choices that have consequences, and just let players freely swap powers as they please, letting the true choice be one that is cosmetic. The day Alpha Realms went live, Sloot spoke with game director and man who clearly was too busy thinking about nerfing your class while taking this picture in Hazzikostas. During this interview, Sloot asked about this very real concern about choice, and in a moment I'm going to play that entire 5 or so minute clip, which means that this video is eligible to be taken down or demonetized now that I'm mentioning this, but YOLO. Anyway, Ian responded to these concerns pretty strongly, and I'm going to play this uninterrupted in case you haven't seen it. The full interview is in a link below, but in the meantime, have a listen, and I'll see you in a few minutes.
So yeah, this is a super hot topic not just in the community, but on the team. It's probably the number one thing that we're discussing since some of our initial blogs went up, and that's going to continue for weeks to come. I think a couple of broad thoughts, and then I'll get into some specifics. I saw some initial discussion on Reddit and elsewhere that was asking or framing this as like, well, covenants are this cosmetic feature. Why are you guys sticking power into a cosmetic feature? That maybe take a step back and wonder if we've done a poor job of framing what the feature is at BlizzCon and elsewhere. And I think covenants we see as a gameplay mainstay. It's story-wise, dozens of quests, different paths, but also these abilities, soulbinds that you'll have 3 of per covenant with their own traits and trees of traits that you'll unlock. Down the road, potentially covenant-specific legendaries that can modify covenant abilities, utility, different perks that you'll earn through your sanctum, and more, including cosmetic things like cool mounts, armor, transmog, back attachments, etc. But that is the entire package. And so, first off, our hope is, I think we didn't do the greatest job of presenting the abilities side by side on the blog. Like, I can understand, you open the blog, you scroll down, you go to Warlock, and you're looking across the row. It looks like a talent row. You're like, okay, which one of these 4 things do I want? I can change my talents, why don't you let me change these? But you're actually choosing among a much larger package that we hope in the long run we have enough knobs and tools to balance and fine tune so that while yes, there may be one covenant that is better for boss 3 in the raid if you're a rogue, the answer for boss 6 will be a different one. And the answer for one dungeon or one affix will be different from the other. But the other part of this is how big are those differences, right? Like, do you technically, money aside, for gold, you can race change if you want to. I don't know that I've ever, in MDI, people will min-max their races. I don't know that I've ever seen someone apply to and get declined for a pug because they were the wrong race for their given class, or that we've seen people change from one race to the other. Because while those differences exist, they're relatively smaller. Now, philosophy-wise, the thing that we're trying to defend here and trying to hold out for, frankly, is just meaningful choice. It's that core RPG sense of identity. And we've heard feedback from players, and I think which make good points over the years, who ask the question of like, is WoW even an RPG anymore? What about my character customization? What about my identity? What about my agency? Like every game you've ever played, probably in the genre, going back 20 years or more, has you make these choices about what do you want your character to excel at, and what are your weaknesses? What are the trade-offs? Are you going to play some single-player RPG and focus on all your stealth traits and whether it's Skyrim, Fallout, whatever, or are you going to be the toe-to-toe brawler, or are you going to solve problems in different ways using ingenuity, and you're going to have strengths and weaknesses. The second that we say that only cosmetics can fall in that space, that anything that has a mechanical advantage to it needs to be something that can be changed instantly on the fly, we're saying that identity can no longer include those core RPG elements. And I understand that community has a real big part in this, and that people's fear is often driven by their firsthand experience, getting declined from pugs, getting turned down or benched by their raid leader or whatever else because of these choices or things that feel like they're out of their control. And the path forward for us right now is to try to navigate those rocks on either side and find a way to save what we see as like the beating heart of the RPG genre without giving players those terrible experiences. How nuanced can the Covenant choices be? How can the pros and cons play out such that it feels like more situational and not, okay, this is the right choice, this is the wrong choice. If we fail in that, yes, there is the ultimate fallback option of, all right, we just give up and you can swap them freely and don't worry about it. But then you're also going to be in a world where you are a Kyrian running around with these rad angel wings and a back attachment looking like, the embodiment of the Valkyr, using plague and blood and necrotic stuff because you're using Venthyr and Necrolord abilities. It's not what the system was designed around. We lose something when we do that. It's not something we want to give up, and I think it's not something that's what's best for the game in the long run. And so we're going to fight to find a solution, but the community, I would hope, is with us in this fight. The conversation I'd love to have in the coming weeks is what are the balances that we can strike? What is a path forward that's not just, hey, Blizzard, don't ever attach power to any kind of meaningful choice? Because there is something cool about these choices. And let's try to save it before we just throw it out.
Okie dokie, welcome back. Let's go over the main takeaways from that 5-minute spiel. Now, maybe they slipped up a bit on their delivery on Covenant in the first place, that it's not just cosmetics and an ability, it's almost like a subclass in WoW. It just wasn't messaged strongly enough. Because otherwise, even with very little information that was provided between BlizzCon and the alpha reveals that were recently done, maybe there would have been a much more vibrant or angry conversation. The Covenants are meant to have their strengths and weaknesses. One of the challenges for Blizzard is to make those strengths or weaknesses not so impactful that it's the deciding factor that makes everything else about Covenants irrelevant. They're trying to reintroduce choice with consequences where lately, that hasn't really been much of a thing. He addresses a favorite line among critics, this question that whether WoW is an RPG anymore. And he did this by asserting that being able to swap out these Covenant abilities is in fact removing the uniqueness of Covenants and disrupting that sense of roleplay that they are in fact trying to bring. But he is prepared to throw in the towel if ultimately they're unable to find a satisfying enough balance. It just sets a really bad precedent for future design. Maybe that's all some people needed to hear, like, oh, Blizz might make a talent row instead? Alright boys, let's just keep spamming the internet until they give in. So Ian's pushing back pretty hard, knowing that it's going to be a tough fight, knowing that he can be pressured into caving. I'm of two minds of this, and in just a moment I'm going to share, but first I at least want to give Ian some credit for once again sticking his neck out there and encouraging conversation in the face of those who vehemently disagree or just irrationally loathe him. So I guess I ought to start with the part of me that disagrees and doubts that Blizzard can pull this off. It's only fair. Alright, so my negative rebuttal. Earlier, I said Covenants are a kind of subclass contained in a single expansion. Ian said that they're the sum of many things, and that our choice is going to be based on the entire package. The problem is that this package isn't going to be fully unwrapped until, well, not the end of alpha, or the beta, or even at launch. Covenants aren't going to be fully realized until towards the end of the Shadowlands expansion. Even if Covenant abilities and soulbinds aren't rebalanced from patch to patch, like if there are no changes, it is being hinted by Blizzard that they will grow, and thus they will in fact change. My favorite Covenant today might get a new soulbind a couple of patches from now that isn't very impressive, while frickin' Bob over there might have his Covenant get something ridiculous and awesome and desirable. That would make my original choice feel pretty bad. On top of that, Covenants are a second critical choice in WoW, where we choose class and then Covenant. As time goes on, what's the likelihood that my class and covenant are nerfed or something like that? That's like a double whammy, and that's bound to turn players off. So the journey, the emotional roller coaster of covenants and our choices has only just begun, and it's not going to stop. Each build, each patch, each small change is going to shift the conversation, but keep it decidedly negative, unless Blizzard can in fact succeed at closing the divide between Covenant abilities. Good freaking luck. According to Ian, Covenants will have their strengths and weaknesses depending on like the boss encounter, or the PvP situation, or which Mythic Plus dungeon with whatever affix. But I imagine that there's a good chunk of players who don't bother dabbling in every little bit of content. Instead, they just PvP, or they just do dungeons, or they're going to just do Torghast. These players will look at Covenants with a different lens than others, and for them, their choice based on player power is going to be a bit more clear, although that might clash with their cosmetic choice. And maybe, as sad as this may sound, maybe the so-called majority of players in WoW have moved on from choice. Maybe we're better off with a feel that is more like a Diablo 3, where we can freely swap builds with the push of a button. That way no one feels bad, except for maybe that one person with the least popular covenant who refuses to change because they want to hold on to that sense of theme and roleplay. Ian knows that this is a fight that he can lose. However, and this is me switching to a different mindset, maybe Ian's got a point. Looking past the possible or the likely pressure that we have to make this right choice, I can see myself feeling more excited to make that choice, knowing that I will, for example, I'm going to be a paladin aligned with the Kyrian. I will walk this path because I think that's what my character would want to do. He will wear his scars, I guess. Just like how I'm going to have my druid join the Necrolords and my Death Knight is going to join the Night Fae because, irony. The coolness of choice, as Ian describes it, isn't something that you can measure, let alone sim and come to this logical conclusion. The few times I've pulled people, their choice of Covenant would not be based on which sim the best. I've tried to be fair, but my history of statements and feelings insists that I am, in fact, I'm biased in favor of making a difficult Covenant choice. I don't mind that. I kind of like it. I chose to be a Protection Paladin. So that means not having Death Grip or Heroic Leap or looking like like an upright bear. But Paladins have tools and toys that other classes don't. Engineers still have like the Looterang, I could still use that, while the other professions, they just make money, I guess. Being able to swap Covenants would make them not unlike talents, which aren't really choices. They're slots to manipulate to optimize my class for a given situation, and there is already plenty of optimization in WoW, although you guys are going to really nail me on that one, I think. But I'm talking about choosing the right talent, getting the right stats, collecting the right trinkets, pulling off the ideal rotation, having the right raid comp, and more. But with one of these few choices that I had to make, my class, I'm going to work with what I've got and optimize that to perform as best as I'm able. So the same would go for Covenants, right? Because Covenants are more than the sum of those two abilities. Soulbinds are a system of slots and optimization, meaning that I can do a lot more than, slide another button into my rotation to make the most out of my class Covenant combo. Maybe in a few weeks, we're going to have an entirely different conversation about soulbinds, like do they do too little or do too much to redefine our classes and specs? Just as well, players are more than just their Covenant choice. If I see a combination, like a class combination that's good, does that mean that they're good players, or that they're just wearing the uniform of a good player? On a close to final note, here's a suggestion for Covenant abilities, like a sort of compromise, because I do that. Just like how Zandalari trolls can choose Aloha to worship, although that has a 1-week cooldown, maybe we can do the same here with Covenants. Just swap, give us the ability to swap Covenant abilities once a week. Give it a 7-day cooldown. It might encourage weird player behavior, I'm sure, like, okay, I'm going to spec for my PvP Covenant this week, woo, and then I'm going to spec my Dungeon Covenant another week, and then a Raid Covenant this other week. But I'm sure most players are going to be like, nah, I'm just going to keep the powers that I'm happy with. The floor is now yours, folks at home and elsewhere. I do encourage you to share your thoughts in a comment. I'm happy to have a discussion. And of course, keep talking about this as the alpha progresses to the beta and beyond. Because this conversation is not over. It's only getting started.